The title of our paper is The Concept of Authenticity and What It Means to Consumers. And authenticity is a tricky problem. We know some things about authenticity. Consumers do crave it, as Paige said. A study by Reputation.com actually went out, and 86% of consumers said that authenticity matters when deciding which brands they like and will support. A survey by Cohn & Wolfe, a global communications agency, likewise found that 9 out of 10 consumers are willing to take action to reward a brand that they deem as authentic. And so we know consumers care about authenticity. It's one of the pillars. And managers and marketers agree it's important. This book by Gilmore and Pine, from almost 15 years ago, 2007, they said that managers must excel at rendering authenticity. But how do you sort of render authenticity? In order to deliver authenticity, which they said is equally, if not more important than qualities like price, quality, and availability, you have to sort of excel in authenticity. Well, how would you do that? If you were to ask yourselves, how do we make our brand, our product, our service more authentic? Now, academics have been interested in this topic for almost 20 years, but they have yet to come up with a single definition. We can't even define with one clear, cogent, comprehensive definition what authenticity is. And that creates a problem if you want to render authenticity of what do you do to increase the authenticity. So, I'm not sure. Okay, the problem in the field is there's too many definitions of authenticity. We did a lit review and looked at all the definitions in marketing, management, organization studies, psychology, art, tourism, all the fields that are related to consumption. And our problem is we're focusing on consumption contexts. And we came up with 63 different definitions. Now that creates what we call conceptual ambiguity. Who knows, if we're not talking about the same thing and we don't share a definition, it's hard to sort of say when I say authenticity that you know what authenticity means. Among those definitions, we came up with 40 subtypes that had been published. And these are very specific to context. So for example, people might say, some authors have defined this term hyper-authenticity. Hyper-authenticity is authenticity in the domain of reality TV, when you blend fantasy with reality. There were other definitions, separate definitions for brand authenticity or brand extension authenticity. So this clutter of definitions created this ambiguity. And so we had the goal of saying, look, can we reconstruct this concept of authenticity and define it in a way that's generalizable, that includes or takes into account what's been discussed in the literature and reconcile with the existing definitions, and then sort of propose something that marketers can use in order to sort of think about when they want to render authenticity for their products, their services. Again, we did not want to create a new definition. We are reworking how authenticity is defined, and we want it to be generalizable. So we did a number of studies, 4 studies. One of them I won't talk about here, study 2B, just to save time. The first study, we did in-depth interviews. And if you want to understand how consumers think about authenticity, you have to go out and talk to consumers. And there we did 30 interviews in one domain about music. And we were trying to identify the themes that relate. What is it that they think about when they think about what makes a product or service authentic? The second study, we went out for generalizability and did a nationally representative survey. So we have a broader sample about multiple topics that we chose. They were driven by theory, and I'll get more into that. And then the third study we'll talk about today is study 3, which is more of a quantitative study. So we did a multi-method approach. The first 3 studies are qualitative, go out and talk to customers. The third study, study 3, that one we're testing sort of what we know and what we discovered about authenticity. So the first study we did, we went out and recruited consumers who had an interest in music. And music's important because it's a domain that's been marketed based on authenticity and where authenticity is known to matter. What we did is we asked these interviewees, tell us 5 bands that you know very well or quite well. They could be artists as well. And I'll give you an example from one of our respondents would say Radiohead, Rihanna, Mozart, Michael Jackson, and Migos. Okay, so they provide these artists, and then we say, well, what are the features that are important about these artists to you? Every single person we spoke to brought up authenticity. So that sort of validated that authenticity matters. And then we said, well, okay, I'm going to pick 3 of these artists and take 2 of the 3, and you tell me how these 2 are different than that third in terms of authenticity. And this is known as the Repertory grid technique. And so what they did is we'd say, okay, Radiohead and Rihanna, how does Mozart differ than them in terms of authenticity? And they would come up with statements, qualifiers, such as, well, this artist follows his or her, their own style. And they would come up with a bunch of these. And what we would do is we would take something like that, a statement, and the interviewer would say, okay, let's take the opposite of that. They follow their own style or they copy other artist's style. And we create these construct contrast polls. And we came up with 205 of these different 225 of these different polls, and that was essentially our data. And then we sorted those, and what wound up happening is we came up with 6 major themes. And these themes are listed on the slide. They're originality, accuracy, connectedness, integrity, legitimacy, and proficiency. So for originality, they might say they follow their own style. For accuracy, they might say they talk about what they've really experienced in life in their songs. Connectedness, they'd say they engage with fans, they feel like they have a relationship with the artist. Integrity, they would say they're passionate about what they do, they make their own choices, they're not just trying to sell. Legitimacy, they would say they adhere to certain traditions maybe, or maintain a certain genre. And proficiency, they would say they write their own music or they play their own instruments, they don't use audio tune, they have skills, that type of thing. So this gave us the sort of basis, but then we had to take these themes and go out and see, are these generalizable to other products outside of music or services? And here we did a nationally representative sample where we picked 8 different domains. So there are different types of products and services. Products are different than services in the sense that products are tangible, services are not. Services are more perishable. Services, simultaneity between production and consumption. So we wanted to make sure we tested both. We also wanted to test hedonic and utilitarian products and services. Hedonics are more focused on pleasure, utilitarian more focused on instrumental or goal-oriented outcomes. And then within products, we looked at consumable and durable based on the life cycle of the product, how long it would last. And under services, how involved the consumer is. Was it high co-production or low co-production? So we had 1,011 respondents, about half female, and we asked them to tell us in their own words what makes the product or service authentic to them. So for example, take a sports car, a durable hedonic product. In a sports car category, what makes a sports car authentic? They raised 1,917 themes, and I'll give you some examples of them. So for example, take craft beer. They might say for craft beer, oh, are the craft brewers passionate about their beer? That would be sorted under this theme of integrity. And about 12% of our respondents raised focused on integrity. And that's not just in beer, but across all the products. All of the themes were raised for all of the products. Laundry detergent, does the laundry detergent live up to its claims? That would be an illustration of accuracy. Is the plot line new for a movie? That would be originality, and that would make it authentic. Do employees really know their toys at a toy store? That would be proficiency. Is the bank trustworthy? Does it meet FDIC standards? That would make an authentic banking services that would be qualified under legitimacy. And then how does the sports car make me feel? Does it make a connection between the consumer and the product? That would be connectedness. And you can sort of see of all the claims, how they fell roughly evenly, integrity at the lowest, and then accuracy, legitimacy, the most common in this survey. Ultimately, what that does is, and what we find across our qualitative research is, our definition of authenticity is that it's a holistic consumer assessment determined by these 6 types of judgments that consumers make. These 6 judgments are accuracy, connectedness, integrity, legitimacy, originality, and proficiency. And the key here is that consumers make these judgments, and these judgments are combined into determining the level to which they assess that a product or service is authentic. And these can change based on the consumption context. And that's what we witnessed in that previous nationally representative survey, is that different products and services had different levels of authenticity based on different criteria of these 6 judgments. I'll turn it over now to Andrea to conclude about authenticity in consumers.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Okay. Hello, my name is Andrea Ordanini, and now I will continue this presentation. And as Joe said, at this point of the research, we come out with a sort of a definition that is, how to say, in which authenticity is composed by 6 elements. And the 6 elements are portrayed here in this slide. 3 of these 6 elements pertains to how consumer judge certain element of the source of the consumption offer, right? So accuracy, integrity, and proficiency are judgment that consumers normally provide to the source of the offer. Originality and legitimacy that you see in the middle here are something that has to do instead with judgment that pertains to the characteristic of the output of the originality, right? So in that sense, I would see, in terms of the movie, or the product that is being offered. And connectedness is instead a characteristics in which that reflects the relationship between the offer and the consumers. Why we are interested into this type of analysis? At this point, as Joe said, after a qualitative analysis in which we noted that to some extent these features characterize this offering in a different way, we try to validate this heterogeneity of these 6 components of authenticity across domains. So our question was, okay, if authenticity is composed by these 6 elements, do these components matter more in certain context versus others? Also because, for example, there are some subtle tensions between these components. So, for example, between originality and legitimacy, there is a tension because legitimacy reflects conformity, while originality reflects deviation from conformity. As you see here in the slide, integrity of the source characterize to some extent staying consistent, with yourself, right, over time, while originality, but being consistent with yourself sometimes reduce the chance that you can deviate from the mainstream. And at the same time, either between legitimacy and connectedness, there may be some tension, because staying with the norms in some cases alienate the consumers, and to some extent makes more difficult, this level of connectedness between the offer and the consumer. So what we did, so we try to, as I said, try to see if some components were more or less important in certain specific contexts. And we try also to produce and to offer a second, and to investigate a second question. Okay, are important for what? So which might be the, the downstream consequences of authenticity in terms of marketing. So what we did, so basically we provided a randomized survey in which we investigated almost 2,000 consumers who were randomly assigned to 8 consumption contexts. And these 8 consumption contexts reflected from a theoretical standpoint the categories that Joe already presented in terms of product versus service, hedonic product versus hedonic utilitarian product, low co-production and high co-production services, and so on. And what we did, we generated 8 scenarios in which we fictionally exposed customers to a description of 8 offers that were highly on the various level of authenticity, with the attempt to identify for each context if there were certain components that matter more for the definition of authenticity versus other. Moreover, we also try to see, as is portrayed here in the slide, if authenticity had some downstream consequences in terms of attitudes, liking, and in terms of behavioral intention. So intention to buy, intention to produce word of mouth, and information search. And so for the interest of time here, I only present here, I think that, okay, so here I try to present some of the outcomes and some of the evidence that came out from this analysis. For example, we noted that, for example, proficiency mattered more and were more important in determining authenticity for hedonic products versus utilitarian product, while at the same time, the component of legitimacy emerged as to matter only for utilitarian product. At the same time, we found that originality played a more important role for local production services, so sports, event, and utility services, versus high co-production services like restaurant or medical services. On the contrary, legitimacy showed relevance with an opposite pattern, so showed more importance for restaurant and health services compared to sports event and utility service. This is in the interest of time, just a quick excerpt of the heterogeneity effect that we found in the paper. And the main outcome here was that basically what we found was that for managers there are different recipes when across context in order to generate an offer that can be perceived as more or less and judged as being more or less authentic. An interesting element that before moving to the conclusion, that we found was also that we found that authenticity is a strong predictor of behavioral intention, and that this effect is only partially mediated by attitudes. Which means that, and this is one of the most interesting evidence that we found, that authenticity play a role in purchase, also for product that consumers may not like, because as I said, authenticity seems to predict intention to buy independently from attitude. This might explain why, for example, people may purchase products that are not perfect, right? Or they may not like. And this, I think, it's an interesting element that suggests as authenticity might be, a so far overlooked driver of behavioral intention.
So Andrea, I want to make sure that the audience has a chance to ask you questions about this topic.
Okay, so I stop here, as you see, and as you can see from this slide, there are the key findings that simply replicate what we just said. And so, I can stop here to leave the floor to the audience if you like.
Perfect. Thank you so much, both Joe and Andrea, for those interesting insights. We do have questions coming in from the audience, and so I'll take those in order. So the first one is, are all the 63 definitions of authenticity related to authenticity of consumption, meaning the authenticity of brands, products, and experiences, and not related to self-authenticity in consumption contexts?
Yeah, so those 63 were screened to relate only to consumption experiences. So authenticity as it relates to authentic emotions, authentic leaders. In the self-help literature, there's a lot about being your authentic self. Those were not included. So there were 63 just for consumption experiences. I would say, though, that our notion of integrity, this idea of this kind of pure motivation, has something to do with the roots of the origin of the word. So the Greek word authenteo, where the word authenticity comes from, often has to do with this idea of autonomy, or sort of having control of your own destiny, and that's sort of integrated in this idea of integrity, the motivations that the consumer perceives that the source has, that are not strictly financial, that are more about passion of making the product or delivering the service.
Great, thank you. How about another one? When we use authenticity as a construct, then, should we isolate the dimensions that are more relevant to the phenomenon under investigation, or should we treat this as a more formative construct and capture all of the dimensions? Good question.
Okay, well, if you want, I can respond, Joe, to this.
Yeah.
I think this is an interesting question. What we did was that we assess authenticity as a formative construct, but in its characteristic of a composite format. And in a composite construct, authenticity, in our view and based on our analysis, is simply, right, does not have a sort of a latent construct dimension, but is simply a weighted average of its component. This is why, assessing authenticity as a composite construct, we can assess all the dimensions of the authenticity in each context, while at the same time we are able to identify, in terms of the each weights, the potential heterogeneous effect, and so in which context certain elements may play a role versus another.
Thank you. Another question, interesting topic. Wondering how you differentiate genuineness and authenticity.
Well, that's an interesting question. I'll take this one, Andrea. Genuineness is sort of defined as being transparent, right? As being what it's said to be. And we often talk about that, let's say, with articles that might have counterfeits. It's not the genuine good. That is subsumed. That's one of the elements of authenticity. So sometimes when people talk about authenticity, they're talking about this idea that there is what we call accuracy, that what you say is true. So if I say this is a Louis Vuitton purse, it's made by the manufacturer Louis Vuitton, it's not a counterfeit. And so while we don't use the term genuineness, we describe that as accuracy, as this sort of fully forthcoming, honest idea of telling the truth. It's one of the things that makes something authentic. The point that we're trying to make is that authenticity, when consumers talk about authenticity, they're talking often about other things as well. So they may be talking about the fact it's an authentic purse and it's really what it says it is, it's manufactured where and by whom, but it also has these other component judgments that can contribute to how authentic things perceived to be. So it's integrated in our definition of authenticity. And this is why we call authenticity a dimension word, because what the authenticity means really depends on which of these 6 sort of judgments the consumer is making that seems to drive their holistic assessment of authenticity.